how do you actually cultivate a new mood in yourself? And it begins with awareness, and it's followed by looking at, well, what is the message that this mood is bringing to me?
Welcome to Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations. With your host, executive leadership coach and CEO of the Granger Network, Kari Granger, and me, Paul Adams, CEO of Sound Financial Group. This is episode 1 of our 4-part series on momentum. What is your emotional state?
Welcome back to the Leadership Impact. I'm Kari Granger, and today's episode, we're going to look at the power and impact of moods. I want to look at moods because moods impact our very performance. Now, that's not something that we think about most of the time. For most of us, we think of moods as simply good or bad, or things that we have to mitigate, or great, now I'm in a good mood. But moods are the very background tone of our existence. We live inside moods. Moods have us attuned to different things in the situations. And ultimately, moods affect the very way that we see, comprehend, interpret, and interact with the situations around us. So today, I'm joined by Paul Adams, CEO of Sound Financial Group. Paul is a high performer himself, and he's in an industry in which he's only working with high performers. So, Paul, I so appreciate that you bring real-world examples for us to look at together in our episodes. And do you have one for us today?
You bet. When you talk about moods, the first thing I think about is, are they supporting what we're after or sabotaging it? And it is
Totally.
so hard to observe. It's like trying for somebody to see their own golf swing. It's impossible. So I get to talk about somebody else's golf swing that I had the chance to see in the marketplace. There is a CEO group that I'm a part of up here in the Pacific Northwest that meets about 8 times a year. And as I've gone to this event, there's been repeated times there's this CEO that is amazingly overwhelmed all the time. Now, he doesn't interpret it as overwhelmed. If you asked him as how are things going, it's always busy. He's always busy. He is always working 60 to, I haven't done the math. Can you work 80 hours a week? But he sure thinks he does. And there's always some big breakdown that's having to be addressed. And this is somebody that's not inconsequential in the field that they're in. Well-respected, large, highly profitable company, at least by all measures that I can see. I've been watching him about the last 6 years. And over that 6 years, he has been involved in healthcare reform. There's been times he's missed meetings because he's had to be back in DC. He's written some unique programs that help companies be able to interact with the health insurance companies differently, manages a coding team, manages a sales team. It is incredible what he gets done. But what I've watched is when people first meet him, it's kind of engaging and he's very, very busy. And people are like, what are you doing? And how's this going? But in that, he's so overwhelmed, busy as he would say it, but overwhelmed is the mood, that pretty soon people find out that he's so busy, he doesn't really have time to find out about anybody else. He doesn't really have time to investigate where he could grow his business. And what I've watched is how other people who now have known him for some time, the longer people know him, the more they interact with him superficially. Because it is kind of interesting to hear what he's up to. I kind of get a kick out of it, but I don't try to do anything that would offer help because he's just overwhelmed. And we've even done some business together that earned his company a decent little chunk of profit from the little bit of business that we did together. And yet it was one time, no interaction. I have never heard him ask anybody about what's going on in their world. It's always him talking about what he's up to and how busy he is. And what I've watched is opportunity and relationship after relationship, people being very polite to him. Nobody's being disrespectful. But now when I see him, I kind of pat him on the back and say, man, I hope you're doing great. You're still pretty busy. Oh my gosh, so busy. And that's it.
Yeah. One of the things, that we often don't see is how our moods actually open up opportunities for us or close down other opportunities. Our moods themselves can close down or open up opportunities. So one of the things that I hear in just the example that you're providing is this mood of overwhelm. This mood that, man, I don't know how I'm going to get it all done, but I'm just going to get it all done. Yeah? And I have to get it all done, and I just need to work harder and faster and do it immediately, and I don't know how I'm going to get it all. Like, just that mood itself actually closes down opportunities and possibilities in the domain of relationships, in the domain of building new strategic pathways for him and his company and in different partnerships. That the mood itself is closing down opportunities, and he's probably not even aware of that.
Well, and prior to us examining this and working on this example, Carrie, I had always learned about moods as it relates to me and how it opens up or shuts down my ability to see certain things or see what's possible. And it's only in this conversation with you that I'm realizing that it really shuts down or opens up possibilities for everybody else watching that person who's in that mood.
Totally. Moods are shared. We do think that moods are personal. We think somehow, where do we think the moods exist? We it's like we imagine they exist in our head or something, right? And that they're completely personal, but they're not. Moods are a social phenomenon. They're shared, and they have the power to not only orient relationships, but they have the power to orient entire teams and organizations positively or negatively. And I would bet that his team, his organization is powerfully impacted, maybe positively or maybe negatively, by his mood. As a CEO, your mood has so much to do with the culture. Part of your job is to orchestrate the mood of your organization. And if you don't have access to your own mood, how do you have access to orchestrating the moods with others?
Well, and I see it even in the team that he's grown and what they've been doing. And I hope this doesn't offend any listeners, although I have been told that I'm just offensive enough, not too offensive, just offensive enough. That what I've watched is he's fairly overweight in his late 50s, and there are people that come to work for him who are young and fairly trim and all that, and their body size is all changing.
Mm.
And my guess is that, to your point, the overwhelm, which means the stress and the cortisol, all of that is actually not just impacting their moods and what's possible, but what's also not possible is achieving a certain level of physical health.
Yeah, Paul, one of the things that we'll see in a later episode is that moods and physicality, like the very way we hold ourselves, go together. And moods and physicality also go with something that we've covered in a previous episode, which is our assessments. So if you look at the mood of overwhelm and what are the assessments that could go with overwhelm? Now, that's something that I've pulled on from Gloria Flores' book, in which she looks at learning to learn in the navigation of moods. But she looks at the corollary of, what's this narrative that we have with our moods, and every moods has one of those, right? And they also have kind of a physical stance. It all goes together. So overwhelm, I have no idea how I'm going to get everything done. And you could imagine, man, I have no idea how I'm going to get it all done. There's an assessment that I have to get it all done, and that I'm not going to get it all done, and that I cannot possibly keep up with everything that I have to get all done. And you could imagine that the physical body actually takes shape around that.
And you see it in the people that are overwhelmed when they're walking. They're just almost always head down. They're certainly not looking around, able to be present and really listen. Not listen in a room and just be aware of what's going on in a room, say at an event, but they're also not able to even just be present to you when you're talking with them, which means they may not be present to most anything that they're interacting with, jumping from one thing to another, all the while they're actually signaling with that body language the mood that they're in before anybody has a chance to interact with them to find out what mood they're in, shutting down possibilities.
Shutting down possibilities. Now, there's two other things I want to pull out from this example, Paul. One is, in particular moods and even the physical stances, which we'll talk about in a later episode, but in a mood such as overwhelm, my focus becomes narrow to the next action. So, particularly as senior leaders, we've got to note how our moods limit our capacity to be strategic. So that's something that I would get concerned about if I was working with the CEO is has he given himself the proper structure, the proper space and time and the mood required to really be strategic rather than tactical?
And I think he did at one point, because at some point he designed a bunch of these things that he's now fully engaged in and overwhelmed with.
Mhm. Mhm.
Except I don't think he has the space now. And I run around the Pacific Northwest with a group of entrepreneurs, and I am the only one I know that doesn't check my own email.
Mhm.
And they're all literally allowing not just their own busyness to set their agenda, but allowing inbound stuff coming in, hitting them to set the agenda of the next thing they're going to do.
Yeah, being at the effect of the mood, and that's busyness is also a mood, yeah?
Yes.
So and busyness is actually, I think, a national epidemic mood that I'm seeing
Yes.
lately. But here's the thing is we do think we're at the effect of our moods. I mean, number 1, we don't even see the mood. Number 2, we think this mood is personal and nobody else can see it and not affecting others, and we don't see the effect that it has on us and our actions and our possibilities, our horizons of possibilities in front of us. But we actually have been brought up to think that we are at the effect, that the circumstances dictate the mood and we're at the effect of that mood. What I'd like to introduce to us today is that we can actually cultivate new moods. And that's something that I've been studying a bit with somebody we've talked about before on this call is Dr. Fernando Flores is how do you actually cultivate a new mood in yourself? And it begins with awareness. And it's followed by looking at, well, what is the message that this mood is bringing to me? What are the assessments that are correlated with this mood? And how does this mood have me stand? And let me see if I can revise some of those assessments. Let me see if I can actually start to generate, manifest, bring up a more productive mood for myself, like such as acceptance, accepting that, yes, this is the case. Yes, I have given myself many things for me to do. Yes, I've said yes to some things. Yes, I have I have this X number of things in front of me that I have these kind of deadlines with, but an acceptance of it, not I have this and the assessment is too much. So, how do I start to cultivate new moods and emotions that are more productive for me, such that my horizon of opportunities expands?
Well, and in the work that I did with Fernando years ago, one of the things that came out of it for me was not he when he talked about cultivating moods, one of the ones that I most resonate with that hurt people financially and hurt executives chasing the next thing is they've never cultivated the mood of contentment.
Mm, yes.
Something that simple of like, wait a second. Literally having people that are nearly in an existential crisis because they have a company that's making them $1.5 million a year, and they wonder if they're not doing a good enough job of growing that company because they've never had to borrow money. And then when a question gets asked by me of, well, do you think you really want to grow it to making $3-4 million a year? Or would you rather work to craft a situation where you run this company 1 day a week and then spend a truckload of time with your family? And it stops them in their tracks because they've never observed before that they were in a mood that had to do with them just getting on to the next thing. Even if it was wild and strategic, it was getting something new done in the business, influenced by the people that they're around.
Paul, I don't know if it's there, but I have to say that I hear another mood in your example lurking in the background. And the other mood that I hear lurking in the background is one of arrogance. So arrogance is that mood of superiority that, I know this or I do this better than other people. That in a way that kind of makes me a better person than others. And, arrogant people usually, now I do know some who wouldn't necessarily say, "Oh yeah, I'm a better person." But the mood itself has them value others less. Like other people are less important than me and what I have going on. So that mood of arrogance actually alters the way that they see opportunities and relationships with other people. Would you say that that's accurate in this situation or not so much?
Well, at the risk of the people listening to the podcast that will figure out who this person is, probably. But and only because one of the things I try to do when I'm thinking about the words and language I'm using, I just quickly Googled the definition of arrogant: having or revealing an exaggerated sense of one's own importance or abilities. And I'd have to agree because, as at least in all the interactions, not just the ones I have, but interactions that other people have had with him, it's as if most of what he's doing is talking about how good his abilities are and what he is doing and what he's driving in the company, and that's just kind of permeating out.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. As we start to get interested and master the subjective space of moods, we can be able to work with moods quite effectively. So for example, I worked with this woman, this executive VP, who could not get angry. It's like all these things were happening with her. And I was thinking, I was like, man, you know, uh, uh, Jane, I'm going to use a different name. Man, Jane, I'm just curious. If it were me, I would feel angry. She goes, oh, no, 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 I don't feel angry. I thought, wow, now that's really interesting. So as we started to work and we actually worked on her capacity to feel angry, she had a whole world of possible actions to work with her team. Things that were legitimately angering situations, and her incapacity to show and feel anger was actually impacting her performance as a leader in that situation.
Well, and I think back as you share that to the first time that before just hearing about you, that I was at a conference where you were speaking for several days, which was so good. I literally sent my wife halfway across the world to hear you 8 weeks later, to a country that isn't super, super friendly to women, which I thought was amazing that you guys did the event there. And what occurred to me was you went through, I don't remember how long it was. It may have been a 2 hour long conversation you led the group in about what kind of moods can you have and use as a leader. And I remember it like it was nearly exhaustive. And what it came down to was all of them are available to you. And hence why we need to cultivate them.
Exactly. And be able to work with them, not just mitigate them, not just suppress them, but actually acknowledge, oh my gosh, they have this huge influencing factor on it. And we can even use moods to intervene in our own performance and the performance of others. So
Well,
let's get interested in moods.
well, in the cultivating one mood that we've seen across the board that's been amazing for people to really go after in certain areas of their life where they keep pushing for more, 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 more is just cultivating contentment.
Oh, yeah, that's
Being
a good
like
one. Hmm.
like somebody making 1.5 million a year, do they need to go try to get to 3 and really scour themselves about it? Like maybe they should be growing their company faster, or their friends are growing theirs faster, to instead say, well, instead of working 5 days a week, what if I just work 3 days a week or 1 day a week or only 40 weeks a year and spend a ton more time with my family? But society doesn't teach people to cultivate that. In fact, nobody's interested in us
Uh,
cultivating our own contentment.
I would say in certain societies.
Well, yes, I totally accept. I'm more thinking about the one that I walk around in every day, but because I think about all the marketers,
Mhm.
I think about the Mercedes dealership, I think about the vacation sellers, the mortgage people that want you to borrow more money to get the bigger house. Nearly everybody would rather you be discontent with what you have so they can bring you what's next, rather than cultivating contentment and then being able to be very clear to build the life that you want. But cultivating contentment is one of those that nobody's going to raise their hand and tell you about.
Yeah, and in fact, some people, particularly in the Western culture upbringing, if you look at our podcast last podcast around sites of shaping, that it hasn't been a mood that has been in part of our soup, our cultural soup. So we actually aren't very practiced at it. And some people are even fearful of it. Like, man, if I'm content, then I'm not going to drive. I'm not going to achieve. And so it's really interesting as we look into the moods and the assessments we have about moods, what we have access to and what we don't have access to. And what in any given situation, for example, contentment would allow for, to stop resisting, to stop pushing past what actually makes sense, to enjoy for a moment. Yeah. And to be satisfied. And so it's kind of what you said before. As a leader, I want access to the whole range, and I want to be able to be in any given situation and bring forward and cultivate the kind of mood that's going to support me and empower myself and my team to achieve the best possible outcome in that situation. And it begins by becoming aware of our mood, by becoming aware of the impact of our mood, by starting to introduce and cultivate new moods so that we can produce the kind of impact we're interested in producing.
Well, so I think that's a great place to land this podcast. But I want to give our audience something to look at this week, something to reflect on, and a practical thing to do. So if you're driving right now, working out, pause. I'm about to give you something that will potentially change your life, or at least change your week. What I want you to do is stop long enough to set a repeating reminder 3 times a day. Not times a day when you're alone, but typically when you're around other people at work or with family. And just have the reminder say, so it's going to push to your Apple or Android watch. It's going to push to your phone. And what that reminder should say, not a calendar entry, but an actual reminder that pings you. What mood are I/they in? Just a pause for 10 seconds. Think about this podcast, having listened to it, set it repeating for 1 week. And the way Kari's sharing with you to observe mood by putting that slight structure in, you're going to have the opportunity to look at the world differently, assess yourself and assess others, and begin naming, cultivating, and even starting to understand which one of those moods are supporting and which one of your moods are sabotaging. Kari, thank you again. This, I think, is one of those that people could listen to again and again. Wonderful, wonderful coaching.
Thank you, Paul. See you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations. Subscribe now at GrangerNetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And to support you in your leadership impact, we've created an exclusive set of guiding questions on today's topic. Just text the word mood to 900-900 and you'll receive the link. We also have some special offers for you. Between now and the end of 2018, you can register for our upcoming Productivity and Accomplishment Workshop for 25% off, or for any of Kari's online courses for 50% off with the coupon code CELEBRATE as we celebrate our launch at GrangerNetwork.com. Join us for our next episode on Momentum.